The ballroom of the Monte Carlo Yacht Club shimmered like a show aquarium. Floor-to-ceiling glass laid the harbor at everyone's feet. The water, a moving pane of blue-black lacquer pierced by massed lights. Cold champagne kissed thin flute rims and left wet rings on white linen. Spotlights grazed polished wood, and slides of light glided over satin ribbons tied around the wrists of waiters threading the tables. Elizabeth Miller paused near the threshold to steady her breath. The glass threw her reflection back at her, a woman in a simple black dress that held to the bone and moved when she moved, dark hair pulled back, eyes trained. No sequins, no statement bag. The one luxury perched on her, a watch with a plain face, its seconds hand sweeping with the patience she had learned to imitate. Conversations swelled and eddied. Names floated in them like gold leaf. Foundations, banks, endowments, the soft language of capital. Beyond the central bar, a model hull gleamed on a pedestal under a museum light. A quartet played something crisp enough to be invisible. The air smelled of lemon polish and brine, and the faint metallic breath of AC. She kept her shoulders level. The flute in her hand chilled her fingers. She did not drink. At the far end of the hall, a stage waited. A screen behind it rotated sponsor logos, each dissolving into the next like a long, expensive exhale. The logo that lingered was Elsner Foundation. The serif looked older than it was, as if it wished to have a history. The room was ready for spectacle. She had come to let it happen, and to interrupt it. On a pillar near the donor's wall, she noticed a narrow shelf with place cards. Reserved. One stood crooked, its nameplate slot empty. An outline of adhesive shadow showed where a name had been and wasn't. A tiny, precise absence, the kind that meant a promise withdrawn. She felt the seconds hand in her watch go on. Mark Elsner had designed this kind of evening the way he designed press arcs, a controlled cascade. He would present his micro-grants platform as if it had risen from his conscience. He would say it rescued families who slipped between system cracks. He would lean on the old yacht club to clothe the new code in old legitimacy. He would smile like a benefactor. And if anyone recalled Elizabeth Miller at all, he would settle the recollection with one line. She had been a difficult founder. His team had tried to help. She had missed deadlines that endangered investors. Regret. Then magnanimity. It always played well. He had teased the launch all week. The foundation's press kit had gone out that morning. Elizabeth had read it twice. On page 2, the spec sheet listed App Build V1.3. A slip. She had the final public repository hash for her last accepted build. 1.2. The difference wasn't an accident. It was a seam. Mark needed the public stage to weld that seam shut. He needed the applause to feel inevitable. He needed the club's crest behind him and the water under him, a city of money to class his lie into truth. He also needed her to be small, a former employee, a footnote. The quartet ended a piece. Polite hands met palms. She tracked him across the room without turning her head. A path opened for him, as if the crowd had learned to read his approach. He wore a tuxedo that always seemed to be part of the decor. When he laughed, people tilted toward him to be caught by it. His cufflinks were the foundation crest, his hair held like a plan. He shook hands with a board member whose smile had the fixed glaze of someone watching their own reflection in a pond. She touched the folded card in her clutch. Not paper. Not really. A clean proof. She thought of it as a weight and kept walking. She had not fallen for genius worship or soft promises. She had fallen for time. Lada had been 8 and feverish that week, a river in a child's body that would not come down. Elizabeth's sister had texted from a crowded clinic. The insurance held, but the payment deadline didn't. The pharmacy would run the antibiotics only after proof. Elizabeth had been in an open plan office full of the blue light of late-night screens. Her startup had been 2 years old and finally assembling itself into something stable. A social fintech scaffold that let community funds move like water, slow or fast, transparent and accountable, with governance that couldn't be purchased or faked. Money as a neighborhood, not a fortress. It had begun to work. And then a major client delayed, then another. Payroll loomed. Mark's people had scheduled a bridge conversation. They had offered a lifeline with wording that softened teeth marks. Non-dilutive support, bridge to series, philanthropic acceleration. The term sheet had come over with a courier. She had read it, line by line. It had been clean enough. And then a second courier had arrived with amended pagination for the notary. The pages had been crisp, numbered neatly. In the notary's office, the coffee had been burnt, and the pen had scratched. The signatures had gone down. The notary stamp had pressed cold through paper. 12 hours later, Lotta's fever had broken under an antibiotic that tasted like orange peel. 48 hours later, Elizabeth had opened her email to a press release that called her mission-driven and visionary, and announced a strategic integration. Her phone had vibrated non-stop. The page in the executed contract she had received a week later had not been the page she had signed. The clause had been small, as theft often was. A conditional IP assignment triggered by material breach, with breach defined by deadlines keyed to an internal calendar she could not see. Her counsel had found the hinge and frowned a slow, hard frown. They salted the mine, he had said. Mark's PR oxygen had cut the trail of truth short. Articles blinking with the words, acqui-hire and turnaround. A journalist had called with a tone that split the difference between sympathy and appetite. The board at one of her partner orgs had backed away. One investor had gripped her hand in a cafe and said, "Just let it go and build the next thing. You're talented. You'll be fine." Fine had meant, leave your name behind. But the code had been hers. The ledger logic, the consent primitives, the public proofing module. Her teams. She could not leave it carrying someone else's badge into someone else's fund accounting, used to prop grants that would never reach the concrete lives they were meant for. That was the worst thing. Not revenge, not pride. It was the math of harm. The scheme took in donations, mixed them with programmatic investing that skimmed returns back through consulting vehicles, and called the skim impact. Each euro had 2 lives on paper and 1 life in the world. The second life paid for the stage. She had lived in the quiet of that knowledge. It had kept her awake more than anger had. It had also kept her moving. She had met Raphael Serafini in a small conference room with an unforgiving clock. Independent auditor, private banker, a partner at a European family office that treated discretion as a muscle you trained. He had the air of someone who read footnotes for sport. His tie knots were always the same. When he listened, he rested 2 fingers against his chin, as if keeping time elsewhere. He had requested a meeting after a routine review of the Elsner Foundation's annual reports. Certain numbers did not handshake, he had said without drama. I thought at first it was rounding, then I thought it was method, then I thought it was intent. He had already refused a consulting contract with Mark's fund, which meant he had forfeited not just fees, but also the invisible currency that moved in clubs and boards. At the yacht club, he sat on a subcommittee that decided on bursaries for young sailors. Small money, clean money. It had given him a seat at a table that cost more than it paid. He liked the water and had accepted the politics as the price of proximity to it. He had seen the primary documents Elizabeth brought, time-stamped build artifacts, notarized copies of the original term sheet, email headers. He had not promised miracles. He had offered something harder, a standard. If you go public, it must be checkable, he had told her. If it is not, it will be theater. He's good at theater. I'm not, she had said. Good, he had said. Then we will keep to measurements. He had warned her about the cost. You will be called angry, then unstable, then ungrateful. They will try to move you off the map until you are a story someone tells to close a dinner. And you? she had asked. I will lose clients, he had answered. I will keep the ones that want clean arithmetic. I will probably lose my seat here. He had looked at the little brass plaque on the conference table that read, Committee Room in 2 languages, and smiled without pleasure. I can live without this room. He had arranged a meeting with a fact-checking journalist he trusted. He had sat through the dull minutes in which files loaded and hashes were compared. He had called an engineer he once mentored to confirm the build metadata she claimed. He had ended calls with, Thank you. Please send me your notes. He had not hugged her. He had not promised victory. He had simply stayed. Tonight, he had said that afternoon over a short call, he will play the savior. Do not argue with that story. Replace it. How? With a smaller story that the room can verify, he had said, and with silence when it counts. Silence is expensive here. Use it. He would be there tonight in a tuxedo he did not like, carrying nothing visible. His risk was not theoretical. Some of his largest clients made their money and their friends near Mark. But he had his own ledger to keep. The week had run like a clean, spare montage with nothing glossy in it. Emails with a journalist who filed her corrections like a craft. Can you send the notarized copy again with the metadata pane open? Screenshot is fine. Elizabeth had sent it with the cursor hovering for a moment over the file name, its ordinary name, before clicking attach. A reply had come back with a single sentence. Got it. No praise. Relief lived in the lack. A brief meeting in a cafe with Pavel, her former lead developer, who had arrived looking wary and left looking lighter. He had not wanted to be named. He had agreed to confirm a check sum in writing with his initials and a timestamp if it came to it. He had said, It was yours. That's the part that keeps me up. She had nodded. They had not touched. At her apartment, she had practiced breathing. 4 counts in. 4 counts hold. 4 counts out. Her face in the bathroom mirror had been the same face she had taken through court corridors with her sister and through late releases with her team when things still felt like a series of learnable chores. There had been the beginning of a line at one corner of her mouth that never ironed itself. She had not minded it. Her dress had been simple. The tailor had looked at her back and adjusted the seams so fabric followed her without argument. The shoes had not been high. The clutch had held 3 items stacked flat. The notarized copy of the original contract clause page with visible pagination marks, a printout of the app's 1.2 build hash with a date, and a short summary in precise language for a room that pretended not to like precision. Her phone had held one more thing, the invitation's QR code. When she had scanned it earlier, it had redirected to a landing page whose footer timestamp she had recognized out of habit. It was older than the official public first look. She had taken a screenshot and saved it to a folder named Seeds. It had felt like setting a stone on a scale. She had placed the clutch on the counter and watched the second hand go. Lada's cardboard bracelet, the one the child had made with the old startup logo drawn in blue marker, lay under a magnet on the fridge. The marker had bled a little at the corners of the letters. It always made Elizabeth's throat tighten with something that wasn't sadness. She had sent her sister a last text. Going in now. Kiss L. 3 dots had pulsed. The reply had been a photo of Lada asleep with the bracelet looped around a stuffed animal's paw. Elizabeth had put the phone face down and turned out the kitchen light. Now, in the yacht club, the montage ended. The air buzzed with the light static of a room waiting to be pleased. Near the stage, a sign holder on the head table read, Reserved. Beneath it, a polished brass slit waited for a name card. It was empty. She set her jaw, found the stairs, and let herself be seen. The chauffeur eased her car beneath the club's awning. The doorman lifted the striped barrier like a metronome arm and dipped his head. Cameras, already angled toward the arrivals lane, ticked to life. Light popped against glass and chrome. A host in a dark suit glanced at his tablet, then at her face, and recovered the smile he had for names with power attached. Inside, the foyer swam with floral arrangements and donation plaques. The donor wall gleamed like an honor roll. At the top sat Elsner in generous serif, the amount abbreviated with a letter that meant a sum most people converted in silence before letting the thought go. A small bronze shelf beneath it held place cards for lead patrons. One slot was empty. The thin rectangle of glue shadow looked obscene and tiny all at once. "They said she wouldn't," someone murmured behind a bare arm wrapped in silk. "She came," another voice replied, more pleased than surprised. Phones lifted without shame. The club's media partner had set up a small stand for social coverage, a polite phrase for the roaring appetite that would later rewrite the night into clips and captions. A waiter's ribbon brushed her wrist as he offered a tray. She shook her head. The bubble sang in the flutes, as if relieved to be ignored. The stairs rose like a stage entrance dressed as architecture. Her watch's second hand swept. Her heartbeat settled to match it. In the reflection off the balustrade's lacquer, she saw Raphael enter through a side door. He moved without hurry, as if he had somewhere to stand, and would stand there until time arrived. She stepped onto the first stair and let the room find the angle it wanted of her. Music folded itself at the edges of silence as she began the descent, then returned, thinner. Spotlights crossed and missed her on purpose. The central chandelier threw a rain of glass diamonds down the stairwell and laid a white pattern over the black of her dress for a heartbeat, then slid off. She did not touch the rail. She did not look for cameras. She looked at the head table instead, at the emptiness beside the reserved sign. The chairs there were thicker, their upholstery deeper, as if they had spent longer in this air and had learned how to sit with it. The name card slot at the center place for lead patron partner waited like an open mouth. Halfway down the stairs, conversation ebbed. At the bottom, a photographer lowered his lens on purpose and simply watched. The room made a decision to hush. She walked the long carpet aisle between tables, as if there were no tables. She reached the head table and stopped beside the empty chair. She placed her clutch on its seat and left it there. The gesture read as what it was, a claim without a speech. Her eyes found Mark. He stood 3 meters to her left, greeting a cluster of donors with a smile that ran on reliable fuel. The smile dimmed by 1 watt. He turned toward the stage and toward her, and toward the expectation he had engineered. She did not sit. The MC played his part. "Ladies and gentlemen, members and honored guests," he said, eyes tracking his script on the prompter. "Tonight, we celebrate the generosity that keeps our harbor a harbor for all, not just for those who—" His sentence trailed satisfyingly into applause. "To open our evening, the Elsner Foundation will share a first look at an innovation in microgrants. Please welcome our lead patron, Mr. Mark Elsner." Mark took the stage with a modest grin practiced across a decade of galas. He thanked the club. He thanked the donors. He thanked the team with an open palm. He laid a hand on the lectern, as if it were a deck rail and the wind were his to praise. "And," he said, smile angling toward benevolence, "it would be remiss not to mention those who began this journey before we could bring it to scale. We all stand on shoulders. Some shoulders are visionary, if perhaps not always operational. We tried to help. Deadlines are cruel masters." A ripple of polite laughter. "But tonight is about solutions, not blame. In that spirit, I'd like to invite Ms. Elizabeth Miller, who once worked in our orbit, to join me in congratulating the engineers who made this possible." The room slid a fraction toward him, eyes cut to her, hunger tuned for outcome. He had packaged the jab inside forgiveness, then offered her a stage position she could not accept without swallowing his line. She did not move. She kept her hands at her sides. "I will congratulate the families when the funds clear," she said, her voice carrying without force, and the engineers when their names appear on the build. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The nearest microphone caught it and sent it to the furthest table. A few heads turned as if to track where the sound had come from. Raphael stood by the side aisle with his hands loosely clasped, his face unreadable. Mark's smile held. "And they will," he said easily. "We're proud to show you version 1. He glanced back at the screen where a slide glowed. Impact minutes, a new lifeline. A small footer in gray type read, "Build V1.3. 3, he finished, precise, as if making a point of candor. "Would you read the footer date as well?" Raphael's voice cut gently from the side aisle. No title, no argument. A request. Mark blinked toward the AV. "October 14th, he said. "This morning." Elizabeth let the silence do its work. Then, "Your press kit used that number too," she said. "Version 1.3. She tilted her head just enough toward the media stand. "Our last accepted public build was 1.2. A few people who had only half listened now listened fully. At the press table, the fact-checking journalist lifted her phone as if it were a mirror and scanned the QR code on the event invitation. Her brow knit very slightly. She did not look at Elizabeth. She looked at the timestamp in the tiny footer of the landing page that bloomed on her screen. Then she typed 3 words to herself. Mark placed both hands on the lectern, palms flat. "That's the beauty of iteration," he said. "We iterate for impact." "Iterate," Elizabeth said, "is not the same as insert." A small noise, almost a cough, rose from the donor's wall where the empty slot lived. It was a chair leg moving an inch. She did not turn to the room. She addressed the stage as if it were a person she knew would listen eventually. "2 facts," she said, "both verifiable." She lifted the clutch from the empty chair and removed 1 sheet in a clear sleeve. "This is a notarized copy of the original term, sheet page, with pagination marks and the absence of the conditional IP assignment that appears in the executed copy circulated by the Foundation." She did not wave it. She held it still. "The notary metadata is visible. The club secretary can take custody." She looked to the right. The club secretary, a precise woman with a pen that matched her notebook, stepped forward because she had been trained all her life to step toward paper. Elizabeth offered it to her. Their fingers did not touch. The secretary glanced at the margins, at the stamp. She nodded once and slid it into a folder marked with the club crest. "The second fact," Elizabeth said, "is time." She lifted a second sheet. "This is a printout from the Foundation's server access log, obtained lawfully through a security review request last week." Raphael had his hand still. His gaze said steady. "At 1942, 18 minutes before the first official announcement time on your media schedule, a login from your assistant's IP uploaded a modified deck showing build 1.3. The hash differs from the last public build hash, which I have here." She touched the bottom of the page. "The hash and the time are checkable, even now." She could feel the room lean, the way a vessel leans into a turn when the water decides a curve. The AV tech near the stage looked toward the Foundation's comms director unconsciously, then back at the console as if it could tell him what the world was. The journalist raised her hand without standing. "I can confirm the landing page timestamp predates the first look. Mailed to us by 12 hours, she said, voice flat. Profession first. And the deck on the press USB shows V1.3, while the public repo's last signed build is V1.2. They don't match." She did not add anything that smelled like opinion. She put her phone down and reached for her notebook, as if it were a lifeline. A board member at the head table, white hair, skin like sun-faded teak, took off his partner badge slowly, as if undoing a small button that suddenly seemed indecent. He placed it beside his dessert fork. Mark lifted a hand in a gesture that had ended many questions before they began. "We are not here," he said, "to litigate." "We are," Elizabeth said, "to allocate." She let the word sit. "And to account." The stage light found dust in the air and turned it into visible mathematics. Silence arrived, this time for real, not for effect. Then the room began to move in small, exact ways. A chair skidded back. The sound was not loud, but it was a statement. Another followed. The Elsner Foundation's PR director, who had been positioned just off stage with a posture prepared for photographs, stepped down and away, phone to ear, her pace quickening as she crossed the edge where the chandelier's light stopped flattering. A young man in a tuxedo at the media table exhaled in a way that read as a wordless "oh." He redirected his camera at Elizabeth, without putting his eye to the viewfinder. It clicked like a metronome. At the donor's wall, an assistant reached instinctively for the empty slot, then stopped when someone older touched her wrist and shook their head. The adhesive shadow looked darker now that eyes had learned to see it. Raphael did not move. He had become a hinge. The room swung on for a moment. Two men who had been laughing with Mark earlier stared at the lectern's wood grain as if it had a puzzle in it they could solve. A woman in a green dress who chaired a small housing charity leaned toward her husband and whispered, not to him, but toward the world. If the build doesn't match, the story doesn't either. Mark attempted a smile that had, for the first time, to traverse open ground without a map. "Let's not confuse the public with technicalities," he said. "Impact is what counts." His voice stayed smooth, but the microphone made smoothness sound thin. Someone clapped once, a reflex. It died. The MC, who had weathered more than one donor's misstep with polished phrases, chose a different tactic. He looked to the club secretary, who had the folder in her lap, and asked in a voice meant for proceedings, "Shall we recess 5 minutes?" 10, Raphael said. It was not a request. It was the price of clarity. The chandeliers dimmed 1 degree. The quartet began to play something neutral and soft, as if to give the air a place to rest. Elizabeth stood beside the empty chair and did not look triumphant. She looked like someone who had come to measure distance and had found numbers where others had hoped for fog. The 10 minutes stretched until the club's manager returned to the microphone, with his mouth set into a courtesy line that meant duty over comfort. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "for the integrity of our proceedings, we have made 3 immediate decisions." He lifted a sheet. First, the Principality's police have been invited to take a brief protocol statement and to accept custody of documents offered. This is routine and prudent. 2 uniformed officers appeared at the side door as if they had been waiting around a corner for civility to invite them. Their presence was calm, almost domestic. Second, our banking partner has informed us of a temporary administrative freeze on the Foundation's earmarked program accounts, pending verification. This affects no personal accounts and is a standard fiduciary measure. A hush and a ripple. Phones lit. Somewhere, an assistant's face went pale, in a way only training kept contained. Third, our club is issuing a short statement, now that reiterates what you all know is true. Our ethical standard is not for sale, not to checks, not to charm. He paused to let it land. The remainder of the evening will continue as a benefit for the bursary fund and our community partners, who do honest work. He folded the sheet. The quartet found a firmer melody. At the media table, notifications began to snap into presence. The journalist who had confirmed the timestamps typed with fingers that did not waste movement. She lifted her head once, met Elizabeth's eyes, and gave the faintest nod. It read as a promise. We will print what we can prove. An investor 2 tables over texted his compliance officer. Need internal review. Quiet, but immediate. A woman with a diamond that caught too much light removed her foundation patron pin and placed it in her clutch as if she were giving herself a permission she had denied earlier in the night. The club's crest above the stage looked older than it had an hour ago. The harbor outside went on moving in the dark, indifferent, honest. Mark stood at stage left and said nothing. He looked smaller, not in height, but in radius. His circle had drawn itself closer. That, too, was a kind of accounting. The ball recovered its shape, but not its prior air. The inflated words had leaked. What remained had weight. Elizabeth stepped away from the head table only when the officers had taken the folder and signed a receipt. The secretary slid toward them with fastidious care. She declined champagne again and bowed her head once to a sailor who thanked her without saying why. She found the terrace briefly to feel the brine. The night smelled like metal and open water. Her phone vibrated. A message from her sister came through with a photo. Lada, awake now, grinned at the television. The cardboard bracelet with the old startup logo looped around the cable of a lapel mic someone had handed her for a school play rehearsal earlier. The ink had bled at the edges again. The child's teeth looked like a future assembling itself. Elizabeth typed, "Home soon?" Another vibration. Raphael. He did not waste words. "You have a window Thursday," he said when she answered. 3 family offices and 1 municipal fund. Quiet. Bring the small deck, not the one you used to carry, the new one. "I don't have a name yet," she said. "You don't need one to walk through a door," he replied. "Names can follow. Structure first." She could hear harbor sound in the line, as if he had stepped outside too. "You'll lose your seat," she said. It was not pity. It was a measurement. "Possibly," he said. "I'll keep the ones I need." A brief silence. "You kept yours tonight." She let herself smile, not wide. "It isn't over." "It never is," he said. "That's why the arithmetic matters." They ended the call without goodbye. Inside, the MC steered the evening back to its purpose with an economy that made the contrast sharper. The bursary fund video played. It showed teenagers in spray and sunlight, not in gowns. People watched. Some for the first time tonight. Pledges came in smaller than the usual auction of faces and favors, but they felt cleaner. At the donor's wall, a staffer had placed a blank card in the empty slot with a pencil by it. Someone had written, in neat, stubborn hand, "Reserved for accountability." It would be taken down before morning. But it had existed. Mark left through a side corridor with 2 men who now spoke to him without looking directly at him. The cameras did not follow. The story no longer needed his expression to finish itself. Elizabeth descended the terrace stairs to the marina level and walked along the waterline beneath the aquarium glass of the ballroom. She could see the flicker of light through it, the silhouettes of people like fish in a large, bright tank learning their currents again. Her shoes made a sound against the boards that she had always liked, wood speaking for itself. Justice had not returned her stolen hours. It had not fixed the claws or erased the press she'd swallowed. But it had opened a hinge in a room built to hold doors closed. That was not nothing. That was enough to start. She stopped beneath the last pane of glass and looked up. The chandeliers glowed like a constellation arranged for people who believed their light meant virtue. She knew better now. Light meant light. Virtue needed smaller proofs. On Thursday, she would bring a deck with a new name and no badge. She would say what the thing did and for whom. She would not ask permission to be credited for her work. She would insist on it. She would build the structure first. Behind her, the harbor clocks ticked their measured ticks. The sea moved. Somewhere above, a child's bracelet sat against a microphone. Blue ink bled into cardboard. A cheap crown for a voice that would not need anyone else's crest. Elizabeth tucked her hands into the pockets the tailor had sewn into the dress, where nobody expected them. She breathed. The night held. The ending did not close. It opened.